The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because it was my day off, and I was sitting on my cabin porch enjoying my morning coffee when the mail carrier trudged up my gravel driveway. "Morning, Ray," I called out. "Anything good today?" "Just some official-looking stuff, Mike," he replied, handing me a small stack of envelopes. "Probably nothing fun." He was right. Bills, a magazine subscription renewal, and an envelope with the Pinecrest Lake Community Association logo embossed in the corner. I sighed. Another notice from the HOA, no doubt. I'd bought my grandfather's cabin at Pinecrest Lake 3 years ago after he passed. It had been in our family for decades, a small, rustic 2-bedroom with a wraparound porch that offered perfect views of the sunrise over the water. My grandfather built it himself in the 1960s, long before the surrounding development transformed the area into what it is today. I tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "Notice of violation, unapproved structure modification," read the bold heading. I squinted at the page, confused. I hadn't modified anything. The letter continued. "Dear Mr. Harrison, it has come to our attention that the front porch of your cabin at 156 Lakeview Trail has been altered without proper approval from the Architectural Review Committee. The addition of hanging plants, non-regulation outdoor furniture, and string lights violates Section 7.3 of the Pinecrest Lake Community Guidelines. You are hereby ordered to remove all unapproved items within 10 days. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $100. Regards, Diana Keller, President, Pinecrest Lake Community Association." I nearly spat out my coffee. The porch hadn't been altered at all. The hanging ferns had been there for 20 years. My grandmother planted them. The Adirondack chairs were hand-built by my grandfather. And the string lights? They were the same ones we'd put up every summer since I was a kid. This was my third notice from the HOA in 2 months. First, they complained about my truck being parked in my own driveway. Commercial vehicles must be stored out of sight. Then it was about the color of my mailbox, unapproved color scheme. Now this. I set the letter aside and sipped my coffee, gazing out at the lake. Unlike the newer homes that made up most of Pinecrest Lake Community, my cabin sat on a prime piece of shoreline. My grandfather had bought 5 acres of lakefront property back when land here cost next to nothing. Over the years, he'd sold off small parcels but kept the best part for our family. The HOA had been trying to modernize the community since Diana Keller took over as president last year. In practice, this meant pressuring owners of older properties like mine to conform to her vision of a luxury lake community. My cabin, with its weathered wood exterior and natural landscaping, was apparently an eyesore in her perfectly manicured world. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos of the porch, exactly as it had looked for decades. Then I called my buddy Eric, who happened to be a real estate attorney. "They can't do that," he said after I explained the situation. "Your property was built before the HOA existed. It should be grandfathered in." "That's what I thought," I replied. "But this is the 3rd notice they've sent." "Ignore it," Eric advised. "They're testing to see if you'll cave. Keller's been doing this all over the community, pushing the boundaries to see what she can get away with." I thanked him and hung up, but the peaceful feeling of my morning had evaporated. I decided to drive into town and check the property records, just to refresh my memory on exactly what my grandfather had kept and sold. At the county records office, a clerk named Marjorie helped me pull the original deeds and subsequent transactions. My grandfather's initial purchase in 1962 was for 5.2 acres with 200 feet of lake frontage. In the late 1980s, he'd sold 3 one-acre parcels to developers, but kept 2 acres including our cabin and prime shoreline. "What's this notation here?" I asked Marjorie, pointing to a line on one of the sale documents. She adjusted her glasses and peered at the page. "That's an easement. Your grandfather granted access to the lake through a corner of the property." I nodded. I vaguely remembered him mentioning something about that, allowing residents to reach the water without trespassing through private lots. "But it looks like he retained ownership of all the land marked in this survey," I said, pointing to another document. "That's right," Marjorie confirmed. "According to these records, you own everything within these boundaries." She traced a line around an irregularly shaped plot that included my cabin, the shoreline, and, interestingly, a section that extended into what was now the center of the Pinecrest community. I thanked Marjorie and made copies of everything. On my way home, I decided to drive through the main entrance of Pinecrest Lake Community instead of my usual back road to the cabin. I wanted to see exactly what was in that central area. What I found made me pull over and check the property maps again. In the middle of the development sat the community clubhouse, a tennis court, and the pride of Pinecrest, a large kidney-shaped swimming pool with an expansive deck and gazebo. According to the property lines on my grandfather's deed, the pool and about half the clubhouse sat squarely on land that still belonged to me. I sat in my truck, staring in disbelief. Had the developers simply assumed they'd purchased that land? Had my grandfather known and not cared? Either way, it appeared that the HOA's most prized amenities were built on my property. When I got home, I called Eric again and explained what I'd found. "Are you absolutely sure?" he asked, his voice tense with excitement. "The property lines are clear on the survey. The pool and part of the clubhouse are on my land. Mike, this changes everything. They've been operating on your property without permission for 20 years? About that, yeah. And they've been harassing you about your porch?" He laughed. "This is unbelievable. What should I do?" I asked. "Let me review those documents first," Eric said. "But if what you're saying is accurate, you're holding the winning hand here." 2 days later, another HOA notice appeared in my mailbox. This one a final warning about my porch violations with an increased fine of $200 per day. I tucked it into my growing file of harassment and continued about my business. That Saturday, I was once again enjoying my morning on the porch when a shiny black SUV pulled into my driveway. A tall woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair stepped out, followed by 2 men in polo shirts with the Pinecrest logo embroidered on them. I recognized Diana Keller immediately, though we'd never formally met. She strode up to my porch like she owned the place. "Mr. Harrison," she said without introducing herself. "I'm Diana Keller, president of the Pinecrest Lake Community Association. I've come about the violations." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Good morning to you too, Diana. Would you like some coffee?" She ignored my offer. "We've sent multiple notices regarding this." She gestured dismissively at my porch, non-compliant structure. "The 10-day grace period expired yesterday. I'm here to inform you that fines are now being assessed." "This porch has been exactly like this for 40 years, I replied calmly. "Long before your HOA existed." "That's irrelevant. When you purchased this property, you agreed to abide by community guidelines. These plants, this furniture, those lights, all violations." One of the men with her started taking photos of my porch with his phone. "I didn't agree to anything," I said. "My grandfather built this cabin before Pinecrest was developed. We're not part of your HOA." Diana's perfectly arranged smile didn't waver. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. All properties within Pinecrest Lake community boundaries are subject to our covenants. Now, we can do this the easy way: you remove these violations today, or the hard way with escalating fines and eventually a lien on your property." I set my coffee down and stood up. "Diana, I've been patient with your notices. I've been polite. But you're trespassing on my property right now, taking photos without permission. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Her smile disappeared. "We're not trespassing. As HOA representatives, we have the right to document violations. Not on my property, you don't. Please leave now." The men looked uncomfortable, but Diana stood her ground. "You leave us no choice but to proceed with enforcement actions. The board meeting is Thursday evening. I suggest you attend if you wish to plead your case." With that, she turned and walked back to her SUV, her minions trailing behind her. I waited until they'd driven away before pulling out my phone and calling Eric. "They just showed up at my house," I told him. "Threatened me with fines and liens. Took photos of my porch. Said I had to attend some board meeting to plead my case." "Perfect timing," Eric replied. "I've reviewed everything. The land is definitely yours. They've been operating that pool and clubhouse illegally for years. Want to have some fun on Thursday?" By the time Thursday evening rolled around, Eric and I had prepared thoroughly. We arrived at the Pinecrest Lake Clubhouse 15 minutes before the meeting was set to begin. The parking lot was nearly full, and when we entered the main hall, almost every seat was taken. Diana Keller sat at a long table at the front, flanked by 6 other board members. She glanced up when we entered, her eyes narrowing slightly before she returned to shuffling papers. I recognized many of my neighbors. Some nodded in greeting, others avoided eye contact. Word had gotten around that I was in the HOA's crosshairs. At precisely 7 p.m., Diana called the meeting to order. She ran through some standard business, approving minutes, discussing a new landscaping contract, announcing upcoming community events. Finally, she reached enforcement actions on the agenda. "Now we have several compliance issues to address," she began, consulting her notes. "First, the property at 156 Lakeview Trail." She proceeded to list my alleged violations, showing photos of my porch on the large screen behind her. The hanging ferns, my grandfather's hand-built chairs, the string lights, all highlighted as if they were toxic waste rather than cherished family items. The owner has been notified multiple times and has refused to comply, Diana concluded. I move that we proceed with formal enforcement, including daily fines and possible lien action. Second, one of the other board members said quickly. I stood up. Excuse me. Don't I get to speak in my defense? Diana looked annoyed at the interruption but nodded stiffly. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Harrison. I walked to the front of the room, Eric following with a folder of documents. I could feel all eyes on me. Thank you, Diana. Fellow neighbors, I began. I'm Mike Harrison. My grandfather built our cabin in 1962, before Pinecrest Lake Community existed. Our property is not part of your HOA and never has been. Murmurs spread through the room. Diana leaned forward. That's simply not true, Mr. Harrison. All properties within the community boundaries are subject to our covenants. Actually, I continued, not only is my cabin exempt from your HOA's authority, but there's another matter we need to discuss. I nodded to Eric, who handed me a document, which I held up for everyone to see. This is the original property deed and survey from my grandfather's estate. According to county records, I own the land that this clubhouse and the community pool are built on. The room went completely silent. Diana's face froze in a mask of disbelief. That's absurd, she finally sputtered. The clubhouse and pool belong to the association. The buildings might, Eric interjected, stepping forward. But the land they sit on belongs to my client. It appears the developers built on this parcel without properly acquiring it. I verified this with the county assessor's office. He proceeded to display the property maps on the screen, highlighting the boundaries that clearly showed the pool and part of the clubhouse on my land. One of the older board members, a man named Harold who'd been around since the community was developed, turned pale. There was an easement, he said weakly. For lake access. Yes, I agreed. My grandfather granted an easement for a walking path to the lake. Not for building a pool and clubhouse. The room erupted in confused conversations. Diana banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. This is preposterous, she shouted over the noise. Our lawyers will. Your lawyers will confirm exactly what we're telling you, Eric interrupted smoothly. The land belongs to Mr. Harrison. You've been using it without permission for approximately 20 years. In legal terms, that's called trespassing and unauthorized use of private property. When the room finally quieted, I spoke again. I've been patient with the notices, the threats, and even your visit to my home. But while you've been measuring the height of my ferns and the brightness of my string lights, you've been running a community pool on my land without permission or compensation. Diana looked like she might explode. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Harrison? I smiled. I'm suggesting we reach an understanding. One that starts with you canceling all these ridiculous violations against my property, and acknowledging that my cabin is exempt from your HOA regulations. Then we can discuss a reasonable arrangement for the continued use of my land. Another board member, a lawyer named Jenkins, whispered urgently to Diana. She listened, her face growing more pinched by the second. We'll need to verify these claims, she finally said, and consult with our attorneys. This meeting is adjourned until further notice. But the damage was done. Homeowners surrounded us as the board members hastily retreated to a private room, peppering us with questions. Was it true? Would the pool have to be demolished? Were their HOA fees going to skyrocket? I have no intention of disrupting the community, I assured them. I just want to be left alone to enjoy my cabin the way my family always has. By the time we left, word was spreading through Pinecrest like wildfire. The HOA that had ruled with an iron fist had built their crown jewel on someone else's land, and that someone was the very cabin owner they'd been harassing. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:30 a.m. It was Jenkins, the lawyer from the board. Mr. Harrison, we verified your property claim, he said, his voice carefully professional. The board would like to meet with you and your attorney to discuss a resolution. I'm listening, I replied. We propose a long-term lease agreement for the land under the pool and clubhouse, with fair market compensation. In exchange, we'll formally acknowledge that your property is exempt from HOA regulations. And the violations against my porch? Dropped immediately, of course, he said quickly. And the other harassment stops? No more notices, no more surprise visits. Absolutely. Your property would be officially recognized as exempt from our jurisdiction. I thought for a moment. I'll discuss it with my attorney and get back to you. Eric and I met for lunch that day to review their offer. It's a start, he said. But given the years they've been using your land for free plus the harassment, I think we can negotiate better terms. I don't want to bankrupt the HOA, I said. Most of my neighbors are good people. They shouldn't have to pay for Diana's power trip. Fair enough, Eric nodded. How about this? A nominal lease fee, retroactive compensation for the past 5 years only, and a permanent easement document that clearly defines the boundaries and limitations of your property's exemption from HOA rules. It sounded reasonable. Let's add one more thing, I suggested. I want Diana to publicly apologize at the next board meeting for the harassment. Eric grinned. I like it. The negotiations took 2 weeks. Diana fought the public apology clause bitterly, but when Eric casually mentioned the potential cost of removing and relocating the pool versus the simple act of saying, I'm sorry, the rest of the board overruled her. When the next HOA meeting convened, the room was packed. Everyone had heard rumors about what was happening, and no one wanted to miss the showdown. Eric and I sat in the front row, a freshly signed agreement in our possession. Diana called the meeting to order, her voice noticeably lacking its usual authority. After some perfunctory business, she cleared her throat and read from a prepared statement. The board wishes to announce that we have reached an agreement with Michael Harrison regarding the land beneath our community pool and portion of the clubhouse. Mr. Harrison has generously agreed to a long-term lease arrangement that ensures our continued use of these facilities. She paused, visibly struggling with the next part. Additionally, I personally wish to apologize to Mr. Harrison for the mistaken enforcement actions taken against his property. His cabin predates our community and is exempt from our architectural guidelines. The notices and fines have been rescinded, and his property's special status has been formally recorded. The forced apology was painful to watch, but deeply satisfying. I could almost feel the string lights on my porch glowing brighter in victory. After the meeting, several neighbors approached to shake my hand. About time someone stood up to her, whispered Mrs. Abernathy, who had apparently received a violation for wind chimes last summer. Will you still come to community events? Asked another neighbor worriedly. You're still welcome to use the pool, you know. Especially since you own the land under it. He laughed. Of course, I assured them. I've always considered myself part of this community, just not subject to the HOA's rules. The settlement included 5 years of back rent for the land, a significant sum that the HOA had to dip into their reserves to pay, a nominal annual lease going forward, and a legally binding document exempting my property from all Pinecrest Lake Community Association rules and regulations, in perpetuity. Diana Keller resigned as HOA president 2 months later, citing personal reasons. The new board, led by Harold, who had apparently opposed many of Diana's stricter enforcement actions but had been outvoted, took a much more neighborly approach to community management. As for me, I added 3 more hanging ferns to my porch that summer. I also installed a hammock, painted my mailbox fire engine red, and parked my truck prominently in the driveway. Not because I wanted to be difficult, but because these were all things my grandfather would have done. And now, thanks to his foresight in holding on to that particular piece of land, I could honor his memory exactly as I pleased. The following June, Harold approached me with an unexpected request. The community wants to rename the pool, he said somewhat awkwardly. In honor of your grandfather, since it's on his land and all. I was touched by the gesture. He would have liked that. A month later, a small ceremony was held unveiling the new sign, Harrison Family Pool. My grandfather's old fishing buddies told stories about the early days at the lake, long before developers carved it into neat parcels with matching mailboxes. Diana didn't attend the ceremony. I heard she'd moved to a gated community on the other side of the lake, one with even stricter HOA rules. Some people never learn. That evening, I sat on my non-compliant porch with my perfectly regulation-violating string lights twinkling overhead, and raised a toast to my grandfather. Somewhere I was sure he was laughing. Sometimes standing your ground means more than protecting a porch or some hanging ferns. Sometimes it's about honoring the past while making sure your piece of it survives into the future. String lights, red mailbox, and all.